It's July 27th, 2024, and I'm with Mr. John Jeckovich. We're reading his book, Their Mother's Sons, and we're on chapter 11, and the chapter is titled Passwords Killed in Action and Hospital Bound.
Say again?
Chapter 11 is titled Passwords Killed in Action and Hospital Bound. We're on page 335. His book consists of approximately 900 pages. Okay, would you like to read today, or you want me to?
No, go ahead, read it. Go ahead.
What's your dog tag number?
421, I took 5.
Yesterday you were talking about your longevity.
You're talking about my longevity again.
Well, there was questions asked about your longevity, and you're knocking on the door of 100. And one of the aspects we discussed in your longevity was that you jogged for 80 years. You jogged for 80 years.
Where did he learn that was?
Who gave you the idea to start jogging 80 years ago?
Who?
What gave you the idea of starting jogging 80 years ago?
Setting what?
You started jogging 80 years ago. What gave you the idea to start?
I was reading a magazine, a book, Johnson. He was a runner. That was the guy Johnson,
Okay.
yeah.
How old were you?
How old was I?
20s.
Yeah.
I was 19.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so you jogged for 80 years, and back then it wasn't fashionable to jog. No one was jogging, and many times they seen a guy jogging, they would say, "Is that working?"
Yeah.
They would say, "Hey, can't you afford a car?" or this and that. They didn't know that you were jogging for health. On the way driving here today, I seen several joggers. Jogging is fashionable now, and I seen several joggers in very expensive jogging suits, multi-colored hats, and a water bottle. Is that how you jog?
No, I brought a pair of pants and a t-shirt, and that was it. No water bottle, and I never took my blood pressure or nothing.
And so you didn't have one of these very expensive jogging uniforms that are multicolored?
No, I had a t-shirt and a pair of overalls.
Pair of overalls and t-shirts.
Pants.
And that was it. And that worked just fine, didn't it?
Didn't what?
That worked just fine, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So you didn't need $500 or $600 worth of...
They go through this all the time.
Well, that's wonderful. You jogged for 80 years. And it was very nice. You received a phone call yesterday from your grandson, Tom Jeckovich, in New York. He's a great kid. He's got a great wife and 2 little beautiful girls. He's a great family man. And the interesting thing he says when he's cutting the grass or taking care of the lawn, once he's done with it, if he sees something out of the ordinary, he goes, "Paul," meaning you, Tom in New York called you Paul instead of Grandpa. He said, "Paul wouldn't leave it like this, so I'm going to go back and fix it." So your good work ethics stepped down a generation to Tom.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, "I'm not going to leave it. Paul wouldn't leave it like that." So Tom's a great kid. He's got a wonderful wife and 2 beautiful girls. A great family man. So it was a pleasure to hear from him yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A very nice thing to hear from him. Okay, so we established this morning that you did not wear any fancy jogging clothes at all.
No.
Sometimes corduroy pants, boots, t-shirt. How'd you dress during the winter?
Well, a pair of pants, t-shirt, and a sweatshirt on, and that's it. And a mask.
And a mask. Why did you wear a mask?
Because when I started running, I started exhaling, inhaling, and it was getting the cold air was getting in my lungs.
So it was like 0 degrees out, 10 degrees out, something like that. Did you ever have the desire to go out and buy $500 worth of jogging clothes?
No.
No, okay.
Shit. Come on.
But you see the people I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, I just wanted to establish that because I thought it was kind of ironic that I see some really fancy joggers today, and I remember you jogged in corduroy pants, old boots, and a shirt. Old boots and a shirt. So people would yell out,
Pair of sneakers.
and people would yell out, hey, can't you afford a car? And all those people that are sarcastic back in the day are all pushing up daisies, and you're all sitting here today in high cotton.
Yeah. Well,
High cotton, Mr. Jeckovich. So here we go. It was warm, we're at Battle of the Bulge right now. It was warm in the cottage with a huge iron stove throwing out much warmth in the center of the small living room. We would sleep on the floor of the stove with our bedrolls and considered ourselves fortunate. We were also afforded the luxury of 2 hot meals a day, breakfast and dinner. Oh, did your wife ever jog with you?
who?
Your wife, did she ever jog with you?
No.
I thought she walked with you at many times.
No. I used to drive with the car, then I said, well, I might as well walk from the house all the way down to Sheriff, Alabama.
Yeah, but didn't your wife used to walk with you?
No.
Okay. That night after chow,
I had what's her name? The 2 women down the street running with me.
Were they good walkers?
Nah, they stop and go. I said, you can't run like that. You gotta go set a goal and get that goal, and then make it go further next day.
Okay.
You can't stop and go.
You gotta keep going.
Yep.
Did they bring their water bottles?
No.
No, did they, not you, did they bring their water bottles?
No.
That night after chow, I sat before the huge iron stove and I began to read the letters from Anne and Jean. I first read Jean's letters, and they were written as if they were speaking to me. They spoke of the preparations the family was making for Christmas and how the weather had turned much colder, but no snow. Also how much she missed me. Not talking to me, she was looking forward to see me once again. Did you ever see Jean again?
Who?
Jean, did you ever see Jane again?
No.
She talked of the times we went on bicycle riding and picnics, but mostly she wrote of the times we sat on the benches overlooking the town and talked about many things, also necking. As I read Jean's letter, the things we did together then seemed so far in the distant past. If they happened years ago and not just a few short months ago.
What's that?
Sitting on the bench with Jean in Haverford West. I can still recall quite vividly our many meaningful events while with Jean. Somehow they took on a different and almost unreal perspective, as if they never really happened. After reading Jean's 4th and final letter, I lay back on the floor, closed my eyes, and tried to visualize how she looked the night of the dance. It gradually came back to me. It was difficult at first, but the memory was forming a mental picture. It accumulated in the sight of her in that red dress and that night of the dance. I held that image of her for the longest time, dwelling on every little detail of that evening. Then it was all gone, vanished, and it never was, as it never was. I was back lying on the floor in a strange house, warmed by the snow, and I had never seen until several days ago. Finally, after the longest period, I opened Anne's letter. Now, Anne Mahaney was from Owensboro, Kentucky.
Yeah.
All right, and we did talk to her 5 years. Mahaney, right? And we did talk to her 5 or 6 years ago on the phone. There was much of the same in her letters: the preparation for the holidays, her schoolwork, the weather turning colder, and then how much she missed me and wished I was back with her. As I read the letters, I could picture the many places in Owensboro we went to and the times at her home, especially the last few days before we shipped out. I would still see every detail of her bedroom and even how she looked that night. But strangely, I did not get the same feeling I got when I read Jean's letters. Jean's letters were very much the same as Anne's, but there was something in Jean's that was lacking in Anne's. Perhaps it was the difference of culture, or perhaps the closeness of the war to Jean and not Anne. Anne's thoughts were much focused, and I'm doing well in school, looking forward to becoming a teacher, having picked out and bought my presents and so on. She was definite and very sure of what she wanted and what she was doing at all times. I got the feeling, even reading her letters, that there was no one who could sway her away from anything that she set her mind to. I recalled admiring that trait in her back in Owensboro and also being a little frightened by it. With Jean, it was different. She had desires and aspirations that I knew with certainty and she would achieve. But unlike Anne, they were always weighed with other factors. She wanted to study music desperately, but that desire was always predicated on her parents' situation and welfare. Minutes?
17.
At times she would reconcile it by going to the library and acquiring some of her knowledge of music there, always keeping it subdued. I dare say her parents probably were never aware of her intense feelings for music and her insatiable thirst for the knowledge regarding it. Perhaps it was the difference in culture or the closeness of the war experience as suggested before, but whatever it was, it certainly was manifested into its no uncertain terms. As I read the letters over, I still came away with the same interfering feelings. I did not understand it, perhaps I never would, but maybe, just maybe, there was something else directing my subconscious. The next morning we're preparing to move up on the line again, and we left our packs and overcoats, all the personal belongings with Post and the Jeep. We moved out our narrow path in the woods and passed the line of departure at 0730 hours. Our objective was to seize the high ground north of Veslem. The 1st Battalion attacked on the right sector and advanced approximately 1,500 yards when Company A was on the left and was caught in a draw by the enemy machine gun fire, was pinned down. We, the 2nd Battalion, attacked on the left and advanced over ground for approximately 400 yards before we pinned down also. Shells were whipping along the draw where the A Company was pinned down. There were also some tanks in a defied position firing into the draw, and we could hear the screams from our troops as they're receiving the rounds from the enemy tanks. There were some medics trying to get to the draw to aid the wounded, but they would get stopped short from sniper or mortar fire and the tanks firing directly into the draw. We're about halfway to the draw when we got pinned down, and we're unfortunate in that our protection was a little rise in the ground which did not afford us much cover. Our battalion battery of 105s opened up and were concentrating their fire on the tanks and mortars. The pinned down troops A company must have had an artillery observer with them, as I could see their shells are being corrected as they attempted to zero in on the tanks. The Germans did not realize that we were about 1,000 yards to the right of the 1st Battalion, where we were getting too much concentrated fire from the tanks and mortars. The only heavy support for the Germans' attack was the tanks and mortars, and they were too busy directing the heavy concentration of fire of the 1st Battalion in advanced position.
14.
All right, let me. The dominant terrain all along the front were the long, quite regular ridges, which were generally in a north-south line. It was the slight ridges that the pinned-down troops of the 1st Battalion were executing the escape. We could see them crawling in the snow, crouching flat on their stomachs to take advantage of the cover of the ridges afforded them. At the end, were they out of sight of the tanks and could stand up and run along the ridge, where it emptied into a deeper draw. From there, they would turn a 90-degree and come out into the wooded area behind us. The thick tree plantation gave them a cover, and it was here that they would regroup. Although many used these means to escape, they were unfortunately in the minority, for as long as the German tanks dominated the sector, the 1st Battalion could not move in either direction, forward or to the rear. We did not fire our gun as we saw no need to. What would we fire at a 56-ton Tiger tank? Suddenly there were white figures darting all over the landscape, 1,000 yards to our front. The Germans were counterattacking our frontal position and were leaving their protective positions to flush out our troops pinned down. The 2nd Battalion was ordered forward to join the 1st in the draw ridges where they're pinned down. It was a race to see who would get there first, the Germans or us. We reached a draw and set up immediately, firing a few seconds later. The white-clad soldiers kept coming, and we could see many of them fall into the snow ground, staining it red with their wounds. The riflemen opened up their BARs with light machine guns and the 61mm mortars. The enemy was now within 500 yards of our position, still advancing. Our batteries of the 105s and the 155s were slowing them down considerably, as were the tanks and mortars of the Germans, raising havoc with our troops. I relieved Lape on the gun as he was firing widely and not picking out his targets. I could see that he was visibly shaken, and I told him to get the ammo bearers to bring up more ammunition, cautioning him to stay in the draw as much as possible. Our artillery and company firepower on the line slowed the enemy somewhat as they were still crowding in on us. They would infiltrate by 2s and 3s, seeking the cover of the ridges. We could pick them off as best as we could, wondering why they did not advance their tanks on us. They began to fire Neubenwerfers, multi-barrel rockets fired electronically. They're meant to frighten the hell out of you with their screaming trajectory. Everyone soon realized that they're not too accurate, but they got your attention when they first started to fire them. I looked around at the new replacements in the squad, and they all looked terrified and fearful as were all of us. Enemy mortar fire increased its intensity, and I tried to establish their location, all while keeping the advancing infantry in check. I spotted a couple of short puffs of white smoke, which would indicate mortar fire, swinging the gun to the right. I raised the elevation several degrees and fired. I could see the tracers and rounds hit inside the tree line in about the same position. I spotted the white puffs of mortars. I transversed the gun 3 to 4 degrees in each direction, spraying a good section of the area. There were several small explosions in the area, which were probably the stored mortar shells exploding. I hit something and was grateful for that. Other guns opened up, our 81 millimeter mortars began to saturate the area. We started to receive fire from 88s. A tank had spotted our position and was laying in on us. We gathered up the gun and ran for an alternate position with the rest of the squad behind us.
8.
All right,
8 minutes.
there we go. Falling to the frozen ground, we hurriedly set the gun and set up, and were greeted with another mortar and 88 barrage. They had spotted us once again and were bracketing in on us. Again, we moved the gun, seeking a more protected position some 25 yards away. I knew several of the ammo bearers had been hit, for I had seen 2 of them down. I saw one lying in the snow, his steel helmet blown off, and a deep gash in his skull, much blood oozing out from it.
Nothing has candy, no, though.
The other ammo bearer was just behind him, lying face down in the snow. He had been hit in the back and above the waistline, tearing off his field jacket and shirt, exposing his backbone and part of his rib cage. The riflemen were catching hell from the relentless barrage all about them, for I could hear screaming and moaning as they fell to the frozen ground. The medics were trying to get to them, but invariably they were victims of the killer's barrages. Some were attempting to crawl out to the rear where they thought they would receive aid for their injuries, but most never made it. They'd be cut down by the advancing white-clad soldiers. Lape wanted to stop firing and pull back, which was a natural reaction to reach safety. But I insisted he stay support our troops around us. Besides, there was no order to withdraw. Therefore, we would stand fast and keep firing whenever possible. Lake did not pursue it any further. I recalled his frightened concern. Later that day, he became a casualty himself. I thought how we were paying the severe penalty for inadequate pre-attack reconnaissance. We had gotten the first indication of the enemy strength position when the Germans began firing at us. After we got pinned down, battalion commanders set out a maneuvering unit, stumbling blindly around their flank. It was not long before this unit was pinned down, and the whole fire and maneuver process had to be slowly and painfully repeated. We obviously needed help from some other direct fire weapon. It was just as obvious that no one was making an effort to give us the help, while not supporting fire in the back of them. Outside of our meager efforts, minutes?
5.
The brave, resolute riflemen had no choice but to stay there and take it. I know how I felt I just can imagine how those brave riflemen felt pinned down. To someone in the rear command post, looking at the map and pushing in pins, it was easy to make an attack order and assume it would be carried out with the ease as planned. Running a division from a command post was founded on the illusion and utter lack of realities of combat. Division headquarters had lost control of the battle mainly through lack of information as to who was going on directly on the ground, thereby unable to ascertain the true situation. The battle was probably the main reason why Major General B. Pickett was relieved of his command of the 75th Division on the 24th of January. I did not realize how cold it was until I started to shiver a little from not moving around much. We had only our field jackets on, and a raw wind was biting right through our flimsy attire. My feet were soaked again, and I kept wiggling my toes when I thought of it to keep the circulation going. Gloves were useless, as you could not adjust the gun with them, and they were always getting in the way when you had to do some quick recovery.
What was in the way?
Gloves.
Oh,
I told Leip that we had to keep on firing to give the guys out of the front a chance to break away and keep the Germans bottled up. I noticed each time we fired in conjunction with the mortar and the artillery fire, several of our guys would break away and seek a more prospective spot. I would do anything to help these poor, unfortunate riflemen. The 1st Battalion was being hit by enemy tanks and the infantry from the east. One of the rifle platoons knocked out a couple tanks with bazooka fire, and then the riflemen scattered a bunch of German infantry with small arm fire and 61 millimeter mortars. Our other bazooka team tried to get into position to fire on the tanks, but could not find a route by which they could bring the rockets to bear on the tanks. There were no tanks that we could see in our immediate area, but that was not to say we're not roaming around. Our position was particularly weak on the east and south. The sides we thought were clear of enemy, I could see some 75 millimeter assault guns being moved up into those positions, along with several 57 millimeter anti-tank guns. Minutes?
1:55.
I kept wondering where our Shermans were, which was only the way they're going to get us out of the situation. Suddenly, 2 Tiger tanks appeared 100 yards from our left, almost in line with our position. Leip wanted to take off, but I held him along with the remaining squad. It would be sheer death to get up and run, but surely the Tigers would open up on them with their machine guns and cut them down. The 75 millimeter assault gun and the 57 millimeter anti-tank gun, along with several bazooka teams, all fired at the same time. And within seconds, the 2 Tiger tanks had become so much wrecked metal. Several Germans jumped out of the tanks and started to flee.
What was that like?
They jumped out of the tanks and started to flee. Of the tanks.
Germans.
Yeah, they jumped out.
And tanks were on fire.
We opened up on them along with riflemen. We got some of them, and some scurried into the draw and disappeared. Other German infantry had come along behind the tanks, and we got only a glimpse of them before they turned back at the moment when the skirmish began. We were running low on ammunition since we only had 2 ammo barrels left. I was contemplating my next move. I felt hesitant in telling them to run the gauntlet of tanks, mortar, and machine guns fire. They would never make it. Is that it?
11 seconds. So just wind it down. We'll pick up the rest.
All right, I got a place, let's finish this and let's get out of the news, okay?
Okay.
It's done.
All right.
All
We
right.
just